The Exorcism of Emily Rose. A good movie, scary movie, a pretty creepy movie as well, but also a movie that is riffing off the Bible. In particular, an interaction that Jesus has in Mark 5 with a man who is possessed by a demon/demons that go by the name Legion. And I know a lot of modern readers struggle with these demoniac stories in the New Testament. Like, was there really just a bunch of demons running around the Roman countryside possessing people, even though we really don't see things like that happen today? Ironically, though, I think our dismissal of these stories is rooted in the fact that we just don't understand the sophistication of storytelling that existed in the ancient world. Because this story is not just a story about a demon, this story is a parable. A parable that layers all kinds of different interactions between social, religious, ritual, and even political forces that were in play in Jesus' world. A story that is telling us something about the way that Jesus confronts all those ideas then, and even in our lives today. And I had the chance to talk about this story, this parable recently, and help us uncover some of the context that makes it, I think, a little more accessible to us as modern readers.
The salient part here is that Mark is taking these city names and he's turning them into a description, really an epithet. Because region of the Gerasenes seems to be a play on Jewish words that meant something like the cast out ones. Now, it's possible that's referring to the Gentiles themselves, but more likely, probably to the Jewish populations that lived in those Gentile cities. People that had perhaps left for the greener economic pastures of the Roman side of the lake, or maybe those who had been literally cast out for religious and social reasons. In fact, Herod Antipas had built his capital, a city called Tiberias, on the same shores a little farther north, but he actually had to coerce Jewish people to live in that city because it was constructed on top of an ancient gravesite, and that creeped a lot of people out. Hold on to that, by the way. Point is, Jesus gets in a boat and sets out for the region of the cast-out ones, a parcel of land that once belonged to his people, but was now a place for them. The other side, our enemies. So already, a lot going on here. But let's read from Mark 5. They went across the lake to the region of the cast-out ones. And when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. And I guess that's what you'd expect in the land of the cast-out ones, am I right? A tomb-dwelling, impure welcome wagon. So jumping to verse 5 here. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. And I think we're starting to see why the tourist trade was a little depressed in the Gerasenes. In fact, in Luke, in the parallel, he adds that this dude also just happens to be naked when he greets Jesus as well. And what's going on here is that the writers are piling up, almost comically, the layers of social separation between Jesus and this man. Public nakedness was shameful in Judaism. See the story of Noah. Interacting with blood made you ceremonially unclean in Jewish culture. See Leviticus 15. Touching a tomb required you to go ritual cleansing. See Numbers 19 and all the problems with Tiberias. On top of that, this man is living in the region of the cast-out ones, those who represent the occupying Roman forces. So, socially, politically, religiously, ritually, this man represents the other. Them, whatever's not like us, the cast out ones to a T, like he's almost a caricature at this point, right? To top it off, we even get a confirmation at the end of the story that this man is not in fact a Jewish, he's a Gentile to begin with. Jesus tells him in verse 19 to go home to his own people and tell them of God's mercy. To all this trip, across the lake to the other side with the write-offs, it must have something to do with Jesus crossing our made-up borders, right? But what happens when he gets there? Well, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of them. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? But in God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." But then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And yes, this is absolutely where all of those scary movies got all of their ideas from. Sorry, Emily Rose, your exorcism was a sequel. But what happens? When the demons figure out that Jesus is here, they decide they better peace out. They say to Jesus, "Look, there's a herd of pigs over there. Allow us to go into them." Jesus agrees, they do, and the pigs immediately then run down the hill into the water and drown. Not sure what the strategy was there, but it's pretty metal, I'll give them that. Still, I'm left with this question: what on earth is going on here? Well, a couple things are important for context. And to put them into that context, we really need to go back to the beginning. Mark starts with Jesus saying, "Repent, the kingdom is near, believe good news." He then launches into a series of healings that are all about our social location, the ways we separate from each other. He confronts religious perspectives that reinforce rule-keeping over responding to our neighbor. He tells parables about how God is everywhere all the time. And then he says, "Hey guys, let's go over there, to the other side, where the cast-out ones are. Maybe God is sowing seed there as well." Now on the way, a storm comes up, and Jesus calms the chaos that seems to surround us. But then when he finally gets to the other side, a region that once belonged to his people, but is now occupied by a dominating military force, he's met by a man who is socially, religiously, politically adrift, and all of that is attributed to the demonic, or in other words, that which opposes God's grace. And then those demons identify themselves as Legion, a uniquely Roman term that did not just mean many. It meant, at the time of Augustus, very specifically, 5,600 infantry, 200 auxilia, which were non-citizen soldiers, and probably another 600 cavalry. That number could change depending on the needs. In other words, a legion was an occupying hostile force taking up residence in space where they were not welcome. That force is then sent into pigs, wild animals considered unclean in the Jewish culture that just happen to be roaming around on formerly Jewish lands. Those animals then exit stage left, only to be swallowed by the very forces of chaos that Jesus just demonstrated his mastery of on the boat ride over. And just for fun, since we're here, anyone want to take a wild guess at the symbol for the 10th Roman legion Fretensis, the very legion that camped out on the Mount of Olives and conquered Jerusalem only a couple decades after Jesus' death, right around the time the Gospels are being written? Here's a hint. It was a wild boar. That's more than a hint, but still, it's true. However you want to make sense of this story, whether you believe that Legion was a literal demon that Jesus exorcised, or whether you believe that Legion is a metaphor for all the ways that Jesus frees this man from everything that bears down on him, I think if you're taking Mark seriously, you've got to admit that there is more going on here than just a random porcine encounter. This is a parable. A parable about the way that military and political occupation can crush people. A parable about the way that social and religious isolation can compound that. A parable about the way that our language and our names for each other can slowly convince us that someone else, another human being, is our enemy rather than the forces that separate us. A parable about those who live by the sword and their own military might, how they will inevitably, eventually be swallowed up by the chaos of their own violence. A parable about how Jesus steps calmly, confidently, peacefully into our mess and disarms all of our us and them narratives. Because let's be honest here. Jesus and graveyards and demons and boars, that all feels pretty distant to me. I'm honestly not sure that a surface reading of this story has much, if anything, to teach me about my neighbor. But to be confronted with the fact that I have sometimes believed in the regions of the cast out ones, be that Okotoks or Ontario, or Gaza, or Sutina, the fact that I have sometimes unknowingly piled religious trauma on top of already existing distress just by acting as if my religious expectations were somehow universal for everyone. To know that I've sometimes given in to the fantasy that injustice can be overcome with an equal and opposite violence. And then to see Jesus step into that boat, to cross that divide, to calm that storm, to greet his counterpart, and to ask his name. Well, that tells me I still have a lot to learn, and probably just as much, if not more, to unlearn. See, I think all of the forces that Mark highlights in this story, all of the ways that we convince ourselves that someone else's suffering is not our problem, I think all of that is still very much at play in our world today. And I think Jesus is just as interested in convincing us as he was his disciples that them does not exist. There is only the beloved child of God. See, here's the thing. I'll never encounter a demon like Legion. My guess is you won't either. But I know that I'm surrounded by stories that tell me people like this man aren't worth the effort. And I know that the way of Jesus is trying to disciple me in better, healthier directions. But that's hard.
Hey, Jeremy here, and thank you for clicking through to watch that video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, you can, of course, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all of the content that we're posting here on YouTube. You can head to our website at commons.church, and you can find us on all of the socials at Commons Church. You can also join our Discord. There, the community is having all kinds of conversations about how we can encourage each other in the way of Jesus. Head to commons.church/Discord for the invite there. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you and all the ways that you are journeying on this path toward Jesus. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the ways that you contribute to this conversation. Together, we'll see you soon.